Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics and Prime Minister's questions. The last Prime Minister's questions before summer. Parliament is breaking up later today. And it's a bit of an explosive one for the end. Starmer absolutely stuffed Johnson on the national security consequences resulting from, the Russia report. There have been, I've noted, urgent questions regarding the Russia report in Parliament today. But at the time they're going on, I'm doing this video. So I will be focusing, as I always would for this video, entirely on Prime Minister's questions from the opposition. That's Keir Starmer, Ian Blackford of the SNP as well. Now, just before I get started, my own thoughts ahead of PMQs was that it was going to be a tricky operation for Starmer. And you would think, why? We've got the government absolutely banged to rights here. Yeah, but you've got to be careful how you play it. Because he had to push the consequences of the Russia report, of course. Not only is it incredibly important, this is national security, but also political dynamite. But without turning it into a Brexit feature. Because it was very, very obvious that Boris Johnson would seek to turn every question into an attack on Brexit. But of course, Starmer had to push ahead anyway. And for those who want Starmer to attack Brexit, good, because Brexit is unravelling and we need to try and stop it. Anything Starmer does to do that is pointless at the moment, because the people who still believe in Brexit, and it's not an inconsiderable number of people, albeit a minority, are not going to be swayed by this. It's not the time. It's unfortunate, because I know what people are thinking. There is still time to do something. There isn't. It's too divisive at the moment. The purpose of PMQs is not to ingratiate yourself with your supporters. Jeremy Corbyn always did that in PMQs. What good did that do? None at all. Obviously, you don't want to piss off your supporters. The purpose of PMQs is to win new supporters. So, Starmer's first question. It was a rambunctious old affair here. He first of all started off actually by welcoming the report on the progress in vaccine trials from the team in Oxford. And he wanted to record his thanks and gratitude for the work that they were doing. But then, of course, it went into national security. Starmer said that under his leadership, national security will be the top priority for Labour. And of course, then he asked about the report, the Russia report. And he noted in the report, it states that Russia poses an immediate and urgent threat and is engaged in a range of activities. And he asked the Prime Minister, he said, given that the Prime Minister received this report 10 months ago, 10 months since Boris Johnson, I was going to say read it then, behave yourself, had the opportunity to read it. And it was noted in the report that this threat is immediate and urgent. Why did he sit on that report for so long? So the Prime Minister up, and he said, we've taken the strongest possible action. He did two things. First of all, he tried to say that Britain leads, it always leads the world, isn't it? Straight from the Trump playbook. Lead the world in our defence against Russian interference. And he accused Labour of parroting Russia over Salisbury. Now, here's the thing. During the poisonings, the Novichok poisonings in Salisbury, unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn did not condemn Russia over this. It was all, we need more information. And at the time, it was an absolute lunatic position to hold. Now, I predicted that Boris Johnson would absolutely be coached to turn in every question on the Russia report, which it turned out was every question, into a Brexit thing, a hill he's far more comfortable fighting on. But this was also something I should have anticipated. Now, even though I was talking about it to my girlfriend last night, he was attacking Labour's links with Russia, which are nothing like the Conservatives' links. I mean, Labour weren't taking Russian donations, and they weren't going to the homes of wealthy Russian oligarchs in London, but said, now, here's where Johnson made a massive mistake. He said that Keir Starmer, I wasn't talking about Corbyn now, he said that Keir Starmer sat on his hands and said nothing when it came to the Salisbury poisonings. To which Starmer stood up and said, actually, I think you'll find I condemned Russia over Salisbury and supported the then Prime Minister on record. Now, I don't normally do this. I think I've said that once before. This is going to be about a minute. I'm just going to show you so you can see for yourself rather than take my word for it.
It was an appalling attack using military-grade nerve agents in a town, Salisbury. It could have been any town. It could have been here. And it deserves to be condemned by all of us without reservation, Now, the Prime Minister asked serious questions of Russia earlier this week based on the investigation carried out by our security and intelligence services and the work at Portland Down. And no answers have been given. No answers have been given. And that led her to the conclusion that there is no alternative explanation other than that responsibility lies with Russia. And as you will have seen, Germany, France and the US have joined her in that conclusion. And that is the right conclusion. And for that reason, I think it's very important that we support the action that the Prime Minister laid out on Wednesday as a response.
It does go on a little bit more about his own personal involvement, but just to make that clear as well. And now the other thing I want to point out, that's not just his personal view. He was there as Labour's representative. He was a member of Labour's front bench. You are simply not allowed to state something that is against party policy as a member of the front bench. If you do, whether it be inadvertent or whatever, you would have to immediately retract it. There was no such retraction. Or resign or be kicked out. So the fact that he said that as Labour's representative also means that that was Labour's position. Yes, it would have been nicer if Jeremy Corbyn was as unequivocal about it, but nonetheless that was the stated Labour position. Now, so Keir Starmer, as a result of that, invited Boris Johnson to withdraw his comment because it was basically wrong and provably wrong. And he said, going back to the report was very, very clear that the government has badly underestimated the threat Russia poses. It says it's all right saying you've been vigilant. It says here, you underestimated the threat. He says the government's taken its eye off the ball. And then he tried a joke. I don't think Starmer really does jokes. He said, I don't think they even had the eyes on the pitch. But anyway, he noted that the government has been in power for 10 years. How does he explain this? To which Johnson stood up and said, I think his questions are absurd. He says, no other country in the world is as vigilant in defending itself against these sorts of attacks. And he says, in going further in defending national security, we're introducing this legislation and that legislation. He says, the UK leads the world in caution against Russian interference. At this point, I was thinking to myself, blimey, the rest of the world must be buggered if they're even worse at it than we are. Then I remembered, oh, no. Johnson does tell the odd fib now and then. He also refused to withdraw his comment. And I don't just mean he didn't withdraw his comment. He actually made a point of not withdrawing the comment. And he said, well, if the right honourable gentleman was of his view, now is the time to set the record straight. To which I was thinking, well, I mean, the point is that Starmer said what he said. It is recorded. I've just shown you guys that record. So the record is straight from his point of view. In addition, he's just reiterated that point right now, like literally a moment before. So in actual fact, the record has been muddied by the Prime Minister here by accusing Keir Starmer of a failure to act when he actually did act. He said very unequivocally, not only was the attack outrageous, but that he fully supported the government in the actions that they took and the conclusions that they drew. So there it is. And this is the ploy. And do you know what? You know, there'll be some people there, and I'm quite sure particularly Labour supporters, maybe even Corbyn supporters, absolutely seething. I'm loving it. Absolutely loving it. Because you know what it's showing? The Tories have got absolutely nothing on Starmer. One of the things when it has been discussed who should be Labour leader, I remember in my local Labour Party, people saying, you know, all these attacks that, you know, the media have orchestrated against Corbyn, they'll happen on any Labour leader. Absolutely. Yes, they will. But it's a lot more difficult when you can't get anything to stick. They've got nothing on him. Nothing on Starmer. So they try guilt by association. They try slinging mud at Corbyn. And that's what he did. And it's not the end of it. There's other answers he gave as well, where he was throwing mud at Corbyn and hoping that some of it stuck to Starmer because of his close association. So not only was this PMQs showing anyone who doesn't desperately... I mean, you'd have to be really blinkered and desperately wanting to support Johnson to think that Johnson did all right there. What it was showing anyone else is that the Prime Minister has no answer to these questions, these serious questions about national security, because he didn't answer any of them. He just tried to contradict. He's trying to contradict the parliamentary report. But it also shows that he's specifically got no answer to Starmer himself. I think that's glorious. So then, third question, Keir stood up again. He just hammered the same point, and that's actually a really good sign. Because I said right at the start, before Starmer ever did a PMQs, what I want to see is you don't just ask your question, get a non-answer and move on. When you've got a point, you hammer it, you hammer it, you hammer it. It could be argued the first 5 questions were all basically the same. Why haven't you done anything? So Starmer stood up and he said it's absolutely clear about his opposition to the Salisbury poisonings and his stance on it. And he said not only that, and it would have gone on. In fact, I can play you this bit now because that is pretty much what he alluded to. To
this unprovoked attack, an attack on our sovereignty, on our rule of law, and not for the first time. As a lawyer, I represented Marina Litvinenko. It was my privilege to bring a case on her behalf against Russia for that atrocious murder 10, 11 years ago now. This is not the first time. It needs to be called out with no ifs and no buts, and we need strong action, as set out by the Prime Minister on Wednesday.
So, so Starmer himself was directly involved in bringing cases against Russia on these things. And, he noted that he also spent 5 years as Director of Public Prosecutions, working on live operations with the Intelligence and Security Services. And he said he's not going to take any lectures from a Prime Minister about national security. Completely stuffed him. And you could also tell that Starmer had Johnson on the ropes here, because a backbench Tory MP tried to disrupt proceedings. In the middle of Keir Starmer speaking, he tried to cause a disruption to the point, and I don't just mean a little bit of bickering, because that sometimes happens, a little call across the chamber, to the point where the Speaker had to threaten him with ejection. So then Starmer continued by talking about the Prime Minister's promise to bring forward new legislation. And he said, let me be clear, Labour will support the government in that and work with the government on that as well. But he also noted 18 months ago, he says, the Prime Minister says the government's been vigilant, but 18 months ago, the Home Secretary said that they do not have the powers to deal with this issue yet. Why has the government, he asked, been so long in bringing the legislation? The legislation that would have cross-party support and would sail through the House of Commons, if indeed that legislation was fit for purpose. Now, the Prime Minister stood up against that again. Again, all he could say was, we're bringing in these new laws. It's always bringing in new laws, isn't it? And this is what it's all about with Johnson. I've pointed this out before. This was the same with COVID. It's the same with everything. There's never a defence of their record. They never defend their record. It's only rhetoric about the wonderful things they're going to do. Every time with Johnson, it's we're going to do this, we're going to do this. It's always what they're going to do. They've had 10 pissing years to do stuff. Why can't they actually stand on what they've done? Why can't they point to something and say, we did that? Because they've done nothing. Certainly nothing to be proud of. And he also said, this is really, again, this is where he tried. I mean, I was surprised by this point. He hadn't tried to turn it into Brexit, because that's what I thought it was. But obviously, they thought that the biggest ploy was, again, slinging mud at Corbyn. Hope some of it sticks on Starmer. Starmer has basically gone, no to do with me, mate. And so then Boris Johnson tried the Brexit line, which is this is what this is really about. It's about the Islington Remainers wanting it to be about Brexit. To which, first of all, I was thinking, no one's mentioned Brexit here. No one's mentioned the referendum. This is all you. But also, it has to be noted, Boris Johnson lived in Islington with the wife he left when she got cancer. Not really sure Starmer's ever lived there. But anyway, never mind that. Wasn't even asked about Brexit, but I knew he would grandstand on it. Rambled on and on about Brexit. Went on for some time. So then Starmer stood up and he says, look, I can see the Prime Minister's on his pre-prepared lines, which is, of course, true because he wasn't asked about that. And he says, this is a serious matter of national security. He's sat on his hands for a year and a half. The UK clearly a target for Russian disinformation campaigns. The response has been fragmented. And this is the words from the report. Fragmented, with no organisation with any responsibility over it. How is the Prime Minister going to address this gap? To which, again, Johnson stood up and says, there is no other government in the world. It's always about this world-beating thing, isn't it? There's no other government in the world that takes more robust steps in defending ourselves against these sorts of attacks. Which is, of course, patently untrue. The report says differently. And he says, again, banging on about Brexit, he says, these criticisms are motivated by a desire to attack the Brexit referendum, blah, 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 blah. They've never accepted it, blah, 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 blah. To which Starmer said, look, there's a serious gap in our Official Secrets Act here, and that's all the Prime Minister can say about it. He said the report highlights, the distortions of Russian state-owned broadcasters, for example, Russia Today. And he says, does the Prime Minister at least agree that we should look at licensing to operate these broadcasters in the UK? So now he's inviting, Boris Johnson reckons that he's standing on a strong stance against Russia, and that's actually Labour that's kowtowing to Russia. So he invites Boris Johnson to not even take their licence away, but look at them, investigate them. Should we think about taking a stand against this Russian state-owned media that's been accused of spreading misinformation? To which that would be an easy one, wouldn't it? Yes, of course I can look at it. He's only been asked to look at it. Easy. Did he do that? No. What he said was, this would be more credible if he'd called out his predecessor. So now he wants Starmer to attack Corbyn. If he called out his predecessor for appearing on Russia Today or his defence of Russia over Salisbury. Now, before I get onto his rather foolish comment, which walks right into Starmer's trap, this is unfortunately where, Labour have been a bit vulnerable. They would have been very vulnerable if Corbyn was still in charge. Because Corbyn has indeed taken money from Russia indirectly. I mean, the Conservatives have taken way more, let's make no bones about that. But he did appear on Russia Today. And he didn't attack, he didn't defend Russia as such, but he certainly didn't attack it. But like I say, none of that is on Starmer. Starmer himself has been clear on this, leading up to this now. So then Boris Johnson was again doing his tried and tested line, which I always felt Starmer should have tackled earlier on, but at least tackled it today, where Johnson tried to say, the leader of opposition, I'm delighted he's now supporting us because last week he was attacking us on the... It's like, and now he supports us as if he's keeps changing his mind. He says, no. He's attacking that policy of yours because it's crap, and he's supporting this policy of yours because it might be decent. We don't know yet because it's a policy for the future, one of these magical fairy promises that may happen in the future. You can attack one policy and defend another without that being changed in your mind. But anyway, so his line was, he's got more flip-flops than Bournemouth Beach, to which Keir Starmer had to, Well, first of all, actually, he didn't get a question. They went to another MP as if Keir Starmer had finished. And there's me, actually, I'm typing this out. I'm thinking, and not very quickly, I'm not a stenographer, I had to watch it a few times. And I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute, have I missed a question? What's going on here? Because he gets 6 questions. And then the speaker realised what had gone on and then invited Keir Starmer back. So then he stood up and he just muttered, basically, to the House, pre-prepared statements on flip-flops. He said, this is the columnist who wrote 2 contradictory versions of every article he ever published, to which he got a big cheer. And he said, in case the Prime Minister hadn't noticed, Labour is under new management. Massive cheer. Absolutely massive. And he said, no member of this front bench has been on Russia Today. And then in his final question, it was on, again, I always say this final question, there's no point in doing something that the government can just, because you can't come back at him. And he talked about, the condemnation of China's behaviour with the Uyghurs. And he noted that, the government had taken a stand on this, and he invited the Prime Minister to personally lead a concerted diplomatic mission to oppose this treatment. To which the Prime Minister just stood up and says, this is why the Foreign Secretary has argued against it, delighted that he supports the government, blah, 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 blah. But then he went into his grandstand stuff, because this is what he always does, which has got nothing to do with the question. Again, usual stuff, how Keir supporters supporting them now and doesn't then, and blah, blah, blah. And he said this is a leader who supported an anti-Semitic party, referring, of course, to the imminent report, which is going to be very, very messy from what I hear, from the European Court of Human Rights on anti-Semitism in Labour. Unfortunately, this is very much a case of the pot calling the kettle black, because really the Conservatives could do with a similar investigation themselves. And then he went on about how we're delivering 40 new hospitals, more police, more nurses. We're delivering on the people's priorities, to which, again, if there was a comeback, you'd be going, well, where are these hospitals then? And also, the police numbers you've promised is still several thousand less than existed under the last Labour government. Same with nurses. But, there we go. Then on to the SNP. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. This was not about the Russia report. There'll be a video tomorrow relating the Russian report with the Scottish issue, which may explain why the SNP wouldn't ask questions on it themselves. Their focus, of course, as it was last week, is on devolution. Fair enough, fair enough. So Ian Blackford noted that the Tory party held a cabinet meeting yesterday in a panic regarding Scottish independence, which is actually true. Boris Johnson has announced that he's going to conduct a tour of Scotland. Now, I've got further thoughts on that. I may do a video, depending on what's allowed in the schedule. But anyway, Ian Blackford said that he welcomes ministers visiting Scotland, but it will show more of the people of Scotland just what they're like, these people are like. And I have to say, when you look at the treatment Boris Johnson got, because here's the thing, like Boris Johnson visits a hospital or something in England or Wales or something like that, he gets accosted. Someone will see him and have a pop at him. He doesn't ever get to go out and not have someone have a pop at him unless it's all very carefully controlled. You can't do that in a public place like a hospital. When he goes to Scotland, people don't just happen across him and have a pop at him. They go out of their way to go and boo him. Can you imagine? But anyway, never mind that. So then Ian Blackford again came to the bill that's going through Parliament, and he says it's, will he cancel his full frontal attack on devolution? So this wasn't about the Scottish independence issue, this was specifically about devolution, to which the Prime Minister says he doesn't know what he's talking about, because the only bill he's aware of, the Internal Market Bill, and he says it's a huge devolutionary bill and it gives extra powers to Scotland, which it does. He talks about the 70 powers to Scotland. He says it's fundamentally a jobs bill, and anyone sensible would support it. To which Ian Blackford dryly commented, anyone sensible would realise that the answer that the Prime Minister gave means that he doesn't know Scotland. He says they were promised devolution max. And he talked about the fact, that instead what they're getting is bills that threaten the NHS, workers' rights, attacking jobs, threatened all the rest of it, which is perfectly true. He says, how can the Prime Minister claim that this is a union of equal parties when his damaging policies will be imposed on Scotland against their will, which is also a very reasonable thing to note. I talked about that issue myself earlier this week. To which the Prime Minister again just said, well, I hesitate to accuse the right honourable gentleman of not listening to my answers, but the purpose of this bill is to protect jobs and growth. It seems bizarre that the SNP would want to reverse the process and pass the powers back to unelected and unaccountable people in Brussels, which of course it never was in the hands of. But there you go, the usual Brexit lie still being used here as well. So that was Prime Minister's questions. The last one for a while. Parliament's breaking up for summer. In the middle of emergencies, a Brexit emergency, economic emergency, a coronavirus emergency, whatever, they're breaking up for summer. Apparently they all deserve a holiday. One Tory MP actually, as part of the proceedings, even suggested they deserve it. What? Anyway, what a way to finish them off, at least. Johnson completely blindsided by the committee he thought would bury the report and having to face a withering barrage against failings that were not initially his, but he took no action when he had the opportunity. As Keir Starmer himself noted, 10 months he had that report. 10 months. What's he done about it? Nothing. Even Conservative supporters, and certainly many backbench MPs, very importantly, must have been cringing at that performance, because they know that it is not going to satisfy any objective observer. And I would be very surprised if private conversations were not prompted again by the Prime Minister making jokes about serious threats to our national security. He's already been making jokes in Prime Minister's questions about tens of thousands of people dying needlessly. Now he's making jokes about national security. Because say what you like about Conservatives, I do not believe that many of them are happy about foreign attacks against us being ignored. But that's my take on it anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.